History often turns on a single dawn, one quiet moment when exhausted men rise from the dirt, unaware that the next few hours will decide whether their names vanish in dust or burn forever in memory. What you are about to witness is one of those moments. A moment when an aging emperor, long past the age when men chase glory, marched into the furnace of Anatolia with a shattered army at his back, and refused to die quietly. To understand the miracle that followed, we must step backward into the heat, the hunger, and the madness of the Third Crusade. The air that morning felt thick enough to drink, dust swirling with the stench of 10,000 unwashed soldiers who had trudged across half a continent. Death pressed in from all sides, starvation nipping at their heels, Turkish forces closing in, and a fortified city blocking the only escape. And yet, before the sun completed its arc across the sky, something unthinkable would unfold. To understand how this desperate army reached such a precipice, we must turn back the clock 3 weeks to a single choice made by Frederick Barbarossa, one that would echo far beyond his lifetime. It was May of 1190. The Third Crusade, the greatest coalition of Christendom's rulers, moved toward the Holy Land. While Richard the Lionheart and King Philip sailed by sea, the Emperor of the Romans took the perilous road overland, straight through hostile territory. They called him Redbeard. At 68, the most feared warrior emperor of Europe had no need to prove himself. For decades of warfare had already carved his name into legend. And still, here he marched, leading a vast host into the burning heart of Anatolia. Opposing him stood Sultan Kilij Arslan II, the Lion's Sword, master of Turkish steppe warfare. For 20 years, he ruled the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum with ruthless control. His mounted archers had perfected hit-and-run tactics, striking like lightning, vanishing like smoke. No Western army had crossed his lands alive in living memory. But Frederick Barbarossa had survived too long to fight blindly. Others saw only Turkish strength. He saw habit. He noticed that the Seljuks leaned heavily on mobility, arrows, and avoidance of close combat. Their confidence had hardened into complacency. They believed the scorching Anatolian plains alone would break any European army. The Crusaders' journey seemed to prove them right. They had begun with roughly 100,000 souls, but disease, desertion, and relentless ambushes whittled them down to a mere 15,000. Wells were poisoned, food stocks torched, every mile demanded blood. Arrows rained from unseen hands. Night attacks robbed men of sleep and sanity. Soldiers collapsed beneath the sun, roasting inside metal shells. Hundreds of horses died along the way. Yet Barbarossa pushed forward unshaken. His commanders begged him to turn back. The Duke of Swabia urged withdrawal. The Bishop of Würzburg prayed for heavenly intervention. But the emperor saw what they did not. The Turks were predictable. They relied on the same tactics their grandfathers used, never expecting Western warfare to evolve, especially the crushing force of disciplined heavy cavalry in tight formation. Anatolia's spine was Iconium, modern Konya, the Seljuk capital. More than a city, it was the beating heart of Turkish power. Its triple walls had never fallen. 5,000 soldiers defended it, supported by Greek fire and deep stores of provisions. Whoever held Iconium controlled the only viable route to Syria and, beyond that, the Holy Land. Taking it would shatter Seljuk dominance forever. And then Sultan Kilij Arslan committed his fatal mistake. He split his forces. One portion guarded Iconium. Another shadowed the Crusaders. The largest waited to deliver the finishing blow once the Europeans were too weak to resist. His plan was simple: let hunger and heat destroy them, then crush whatever remained. But Barbarossa had spent 3 weeks studying his enemy. His knights still carried their heaviest armor. His infantry, though exhausted, remained disciplined. Most crucially, he recognized the Sultan's blind spot: predictability. The Seljuks always harassed, exhausted, and then overwhelmed. It never occurred to them that starving, battered crusaders might attack first. Then came the news at dawn. The Sultan's main army was approaching, 40,000 fresh warriors, perhaps more. The crusaders were trapped between Iconium's walls and a tightening noose of Turkish steel. Logic screamed for retreat or a desperate defensive stand. But Barbarossa had not survived 40 years of war by obeying logic. This time will be no different. Dawn, May 17th, the emperor assessed his surviving troops. 10,000 men could still fight. 2,000 knights retained mounts. Many horses little more than bones wrapped in skin. 8,000 infantry stood ready, their exhaustion overshadowed by grim resolve. They had lost 5,000 brothers along the way. Those who remained were the toughest fighters in Christendom. His officers formed a who's who of German nobility. Frederick VI of Swabia, his own son, commanded the vanguard, a 23-year-old fueled by fiery courage but tempered by hard lessons. Count Robert of Nassau led the Rhineland veterans, hardened by countless campaigns. Marquard of Neuenberg commanded the emperor's personal guard, 500 warriors who swore to die before letting harm reach him. Inside Iconium itself, 5,000 defenders stood behind towering walls, 30 feet high, 10 feet thick, reinforced with towers every 100 yards. Supplies were plentiful. Greek fire cauldrons waited. Even breaching the outer gate promised little, for 2 more defensive layers remained. Meanwhile, approaching from the east, Kilij Arslan led his main host, 40,000 strong, possibly 65,000 if Turkish accounts are to be believed. 20,000 elite mounted archers formed the core, each warrior trained from childhood to shoot accurately while galloping at full speed. They carried 2 bows, up to 150 arrows, and could fire a dozen aimed shots per minute. 15,000 infantry backed them. Another 5,000 irregulars followed, eager for loot. The Sultan was certain of victory. Scouts reported the crusaders' misery, dwindling supplies, dying horses, blistering heat reaching 95 degrees Fahrenheit. To Turkish commanders, it was laughable. What could 10,000 hollow-eyed men accomplish against fortified walls and a fresh field army? Yet the Turks had never faced Western heavy cavalry deployed at full strength. Each knight represented decades of training, and each surviving destrier was worth more than a village. Concentrated, 2,000 knights could hit with the force of a modern armored battalion. Then Barbarossa made the move no one dared imagine. On the evening of May 17th, he divided his army. Doctrine insisted such a thing was suicide. His commanders protested furiously. Frederick urged unity. Robert proposed negotiation. But Barbarossa trusted audacity where caution failed. His plan bordered on madness, but brilliance lurked beneath. Frederick would lead 3,000 men, including 700 knights, to assault Iconium directly. The small number would bait the garrison into a reckless sally. Meanwhile, Barbarossa would take the remaining 7,000 to confront the Sultan's main army head-on. Both forces were now outnumbered 5-1. Turkish riders taunted the crusaders, brandishing captured banners and shouting promises of torment. Morale wavered. But then Barbarossa rode among his troops. Even at 68, he radiated calm authority. His voice, low and amused, steadied them. "Tomorrow," he said, "we remind them why their grandfathers feared the Iron Men of the West." That night, priests held mass. Knights confessed, believing dawn would bring death. Infantry honed their blades one last time. In the command tent, Barbarossa planned with meticulous focus. Timing was everything. Frederick had to break Iconium's gates precisely as the Sultan engaged the main force. Too early, and the defenders could reinforce the field army. Too late, and Barbarossa would be crushed. And hidden within the Crusader ranks lay one final secret. The emperor had held back his finest warriors, 500 elite imperial guards with fresh horses and intact full armor. These men trained together for years, able to form the dreaded Iron Wedge, a formation capable of smashing through any line in existence. As the sun dipped below the horizon on May 17th, Barbarossa summoned his son into the lamplit tent and delivered orders that defied every accepted rule of warfare. At dawn on May 18th, 1190, 2 battered Crusader columns silently separated in the gray half-light, carrying out the emperor's audacious, borderline suicidal plan. Duke Frederick of Swabia led his 3,000 men straight toward Iconium's gates. They marched openly, making no attempt to hide their movements. Turkish sentries stared in disbelief. Were these Christians so desperate that they intended to die beneath the walls? Meanwhile, Barbarossa deployed his remaining 7,000 atop a gentle rise 2 miles from the city. His formation practically begged to be attacked. Thin lines stretched across the slope, cavalry on the wings, infantry bracing the center. To Turkish scouts, it looked like a doomed defensive stand, exhausted men preparing for their last breath. Exactly what Barbarossa wanted them to believe. Just after sunrise, the first arrows hissed through the air. Turkish mounted archers surged forward in their signature crescent formation. The sky darkened beneath 10,000 arrows, a chronicler later wrote. But these crusaders were no longer terrified of Turkish volleys. They'd endured this torment for 3 straight weeks. Shields rose in a swift, practiced rhythm. Losses were light. By mid-morning, Duke Frederick reached Iconium's looming walls. The garrison commander hesitated. A mere 3,000 exhausted crusaders posed little threat to the city, but letting them prepare siege engines would be shameful. Pride decided the matter. Why hide behind stone when Turkish cavalry could trample tired Christians in the open? The gates swung wide. 2,000 garrison horsemen poured out, confident they would butcher Frederick's force in minutes. But the crusaders did not flee. Frederick had formed his men with precision. Infantry arranged themselves into tight, spear-bristling squares. Crossbowmen selected targets carefully, loosing bolts at Turkish horses. 700 knights waited behind them, still as statues, coiled like springs about to explode. The garrison's confident charge crashed headlong into disciplined steel. Their momentum evaporated. What they expected to be a rout became a grinding stalemate. Back on the main field, Barbarossa played his deadly game with level calm. Arrows continued to fall in waves. Men dropped, and each time another stepped into the gap. Then dust plumes on the horizon signaled the arrival of the Sultan's main army, 40,000 strong. Drums thundered. War cries rolled across the plains. The numerical imbalance was obscene. But Barbarossa had spent 3 weeks studying the Turks. Their approach was always the same. Disorder with archers, then hammer weakened lines with cavalry and infantry. Predictable, exploitable. He had arranged his entire formation to bait this exact response. The Turks, convinced the Crusaders were on their last legs, pressed forward eagerly. Horses drooped. Men leaned on their spears from exhaustion. It was a picture of defeat. The Sultan arrived and took his position on a low hill, watching with serene confidence. His emerald banner shimmered in the sun, inscribed with Quranic verses. Victory felt inevitable. Then scouts arrived breathless. Frederick had engaged the Iconium garrison outside the walls. And worse, the gates were still open. The garrison commander realized too late he had blundered. His horsemen were fully committed, tangled in brutal, close combat. Meanwhile, Crusader infantry were jogging toward the open entrance like wolves scenting blood. The Sultan faced an impossible choice: reinforce Iconium, divide his strength, or crush Barbarossa quickly and return to save the city. He chose pride. 40,000 against 7,000. How could he lose? Iconium could wait. But the Seljuks had no idea that Barbarossa had engineered this moment down to the smallest detail. His knights had been secretly fed the last reserve grain, stockpiled at the expense of starving infantry. The Imperial Guard, a hidden corps of 500 elite knights, was concealed behind the center, their horses the last in the army still truly fit for a charge. And Barbarossa had chosen a slope that gave his cavalry precious acceleration. The Turkish assault intensified. Cavalry archers rode in relentless waves, loosing arrow after arrow, 30,000 in the opening minutes, one witness claimed. The Crusader line wavered. Shields splintered. Gaps widened. The wings sagged under pressure. Infantry braced for the collapse that seemed inevitable. The Sultan moved his banner closer. Victory was at hand. Then, at exactly midday, two separate explosions of violence ignited. At Iconium, Frederick's 700 knights crashed into the garrison cavalry like an iron hammer striking glass. Light Seljuk horsemen, built for mobility, were no match for the unstoppable weight of armored destriers. Lances shattered through shields and mail. Horses slammed into horses. The garrison line crumpled. Inside the city, chaos blossomed. The open gates became a battleground as crusader infantry hurled themselves into the entrance. Streets designed for merchants, not warfare, trapped defenders. Fires ignited. Civilians ran screaming. Duke Frederick led the spearhead toward the citadel, his sword slick with blood. Back on the main field, Barbarossa finally played his hidden card. A trumpet blared. The crusader center split open like a pair of curtains, and from the gap emerged the Imperial Guard, 500 knights on the last healthy warhorses in the army. They took formation in seconds, forming the legendary Iron Wedge, a steel spear aimed straight at the Turkish heart. From his hilltop, the Sultan felt ice creep down his spine. These were not exhausted men. These were fresh killers. Turkish cavalry had crowded too close to the Crusader lines, leaving no room to evade. The killing ground was set, and Barbarossa had known it all along. A roar rose from 2,000 Crusader throats. God wills it. Every mounted knight joined the charge. The Iron Wedge thundered downhill, building terrifying momentum. 500 knights in full armor, each with a mount weighing as much as a modern motorcycle, followed by 1,500 more in a second wave. Arrows meant nothing now. At this range, mail and plate turned them aside like rain. Marquard of Neuenberg led the point, lowering his lance as the wedge reached full gallop. Behind him thundered the death of the Seljuk center. The Sultan screamed orders for his men to form a solid line, but steppe warriors trained for mobility, not shield-to-shield resistance. Their formations dissolved. A young Swabian knight, Wilhelm of Tübingen, recorded his memory. I prayed as we descended. The thunder of hooves drowned out my heartbeat. Time slowed. I saw Turks trying to flee. Then the world became splintered wood and screaming metal. And Barbarossa triggered his final masterstroke. A feigned retreat. The Crusader wings fell back, not panicked but controlled, drawing the Turkish flanks forward. The center, facing the charging wedge, was left exposed, unsupported, and perfectly aligned for destruction. Barbarossa lifted his horn. One note, clear, cold, commanding, general attack. Every Crusader, still breathing, surged forward. Those who thought they were winning suddenly faced a tidal wave of fury from men who refused to break. And the Iron Wedge drove straight into the heart of the Seljuk army, military perfection in motion. The Iron Wedge moved like a living beast, 500 armored knights arranged in a triangular spear, each rank spreading wider behind its leader. At the tip rode Count Berthold of Nuremberg, carrying a lance so heavy only years of war could have trained a man to wield it. Behind him, overlapping shields locked together in a wall of steel. Chroniclers later wrote that it looked less like men charging and more like a fortress that had somehow torn itself free from the earth. The ground trembled under thousands of pounding hooves. The noise hit first, thunder colliding with the rumble of an earthquake. Turkish warriors, veterans hardened by decades of conflict, felt the first sting of fear. Some hesitated. Others broke entirely and turned to flee. The wedge crossed the plain in seconds, destriers reaching full speed as they barreled toward the heart of the Seljuk ranks. The first impact was devastation. Lances shattered through armor and bone. Horses crashed into men with unstoppable force. Those who didn't die instantly were crushed beneath the weight behind them. For a moment, the Sultan's elite Mamluks held their line, bracing spears in a desperate hedge. They resisted for 7 seconds, long enough to show courage, but not long enough to make a difference. The wedge plowed through them like a collapsing wave, tossing aside bodies and splintered weapons. Once the line broke, panic spread rapidly. Soldiers behind the breach saw their champions destroyed and felt their nerve disintegrate. What began as hesitation became a flood. One man fleeing became 10, then hundreds. Count Robert of Nassau, his lance already broken, drew his sword and cut through fleeing enemies without slowing. Turkish commanders tried to gather units, but most were trampled before their orders reached anyone who could obey. Barbarossa knew the moment had come. He spurred his horse toward the Sultan's green banner, the anchor of the Turkish army. His imperial guard formed a tight ring around him, cutting down anyone who tried to reach their emperor. When the green standard finally toppled into the dust, a cry rose through the Seljuk ranks. Allah has abandoned us. The army's spirit shattered. The Sultan himself fled the field, galloping for safety. His departure triggered the final collapse. Crusader cavalry ran down fugitives with ruthless efficiency. No quarter was asked, none was given. Weeks of starvation, poisoned wells, and ambushes had hardened the Crusaders beyond mercy. At nearly the same hour, Duke Frederick burst from Iconium's eastern gate, leading his victorious troops. They emerged just as thousands of defeated Turks attempted to retreat back into the city. Instead of safety, they ran headlong into Crusader blades. Trapped between Frederick and Barbarossa, the Turkish army ceased to exist. The killing became methodical, soldiers striking like harvesters swinging sickles. Bodies formed mounds. Blood turned the soil into red mud. Inside Iconium, the disaster was total. The Sultan's brother sealed himself inside the citadel while Crusaders seized warehouses filled with food, weapons, silk, spices, and gold. The legendary treasury of rum, untouched for generations, vanished in a single night. Crusader losses were astonishingly light, fewer than 500 dead. Turkish casualties reached into the tens of thousands. Amid the ruin, a rare moment of humanity surfaced. Barbarossa, bloodied and exhausted, found his son Frederick in the palace district. Father and son embraced, both stunned to be alive. "You have done well," Barbarossa said, his voice breaking. The sack of Iconium continued into the night. Soldiers who had survived on scraps now feasted on captured stores. Wine flowed until dawn, but Barbarossa kept enough order to guard the gates. He knew victory could vanish as quickly as it had arrived. The Sultan emerged under a flag of truce on the morning of May 19th. Broken and humiliated, he offered gold, hostages, supplies, anything to make the Crusaders leave. Barbarossa agreed. His objective was achieved. The psychological shock spread across the Muslim world. Iconium had been considered impregnable. Seljuk cavalry had seemed invincible. Yet both myths collapsed in an afternoon. And then came the cruel twist of history. 22 days later, on June 10th, 1190, Frederick Barbarossa drowned crossing the Salef River. Whether his horse slipped or his armor dragged him down, no one could say. The man who had survived 40 years of warfare died in waist-deep water. Leaderless, the German Crusader army dissolved. Had Barbarossa reached the Holy Land with his hardened veterans, history might have taken a different shape. Instead, Iconium became his final masterpiece, Western Europe's last great triumph in Anatolia. The battle reshaped medieval warfare, proving that disciplined heavy cavalry, perfectly deployed, could break even overwhelming numbers. The Iron Wedge became a model for generations. Military academies still study Iconium for its lessons on timing, deception, and terrain. The deeper message endures. Impossible odds remain impossible only until someone refuses to yield. Barbarossa overcame starvation, ambushes, hostile terrain, and a fortified capital. Through audacity and will, he achieved one of the most one-sided victories in medieval history. 10,000 men faced 40,000 and prevailed. Iconium's ruins still stand in modern Turkey. Travelers can walk the ground where Crusader hooves once shook the earth. But the real monument is not stone. It is the truth Barbarossa proved. When leadership, discipline, and unbreakable determination unite, even the impossible becomes merely difficult.